Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today in this week's podcast. I'm excited to have Patrick with us today. Patrick and I have collaborated a lot at Kronos over the years, and I'll let him kind of give a quick introduction before we get started with the topic of virtual try on.
Hey everybody, my name is Patrick Hadley. I'm currently working at Snapchat. I'm the lead product manager on sponsored AR. I've been there about 3 years, so we're helping brands unlock and enable the power of AR to get in front of users to find out more about their products, to try on, which we'll talk about now, but also other brands, outside to use 3D and AR experiences in order to kind of capture and have people's attention for their products. Prior to Snapchat, I was working at Amazon. I was on their one of their early 3D teams for home and furniture products to help visualize what would be a very kind of complex, longer consideration purchase. And I spent early time there trying to kind of build out their 3D capabilities and understanding the customer needs and journey. So, really excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Mike. I've learned a lot from you in the Kronos team. So, look forward to kind of seeing all your guests on this podcast. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we're excited to be here. And I think maybe a little background from my side on the Cronus tie-in is that, we're part of a group called 3D Commerce. We're always looking for new members. So if this is a topic that's of interest to you, especially virtual try-on and fashion is a new focus, I would say, for us as a group. We generally promote standards. glTF is one of the file formats that we, help author and improve. And I'd say in general, we're a collection of industry folks that are, a combination of tech companies and, brands and retailers, solution providers, basically everyone that's in this industry and trying to get people to do a digital transformation, specifically focused around retail and the opportunity for customers to better interact with products, to make, more informed and interesting, purchases. So with that said, Patrick, the virtual try-on, scene, I think it's relatively new. Hopefully, at this point, a lot of the audience has seen that experience somewhere. We're finding it more, in obviously Snapchat, but in Amazon, even on customers' own websites now. There's oftentimes, if the product category fits, a way for you to turn on your camera. But do you want to just kind of like lay the groundwork as to like what is virtual try-on and what do we mean by that? Like what are the products and how does it differ from maybe a view in your room experience that has been around a little longer?
Yeah, one key difference with virtual try on versus, let's say, a view in your room, which maybe is where the space started, is virtual try on is really about how to look on me. So, kind of personalized to the individual. So, this could be anywhere from glasses to shoes to apparel to watches to kind of anything that you can put on your body. Users almost want to see it's a reflection of their sense of style and self. It might look really great on a model, almost like that Instagram looking model, but you almost wonder how would it look kind of on me and fit my style and my personality. So what we aim to accomplish is instead of having you go all the way to the physical store to try on a product, or maybe the product isn't even available in all the stores, can you bring the product digitally to the user through the camera so that the product has the realistic attributes in terms of colors. It could be, attributes in terms of sizing, so that you get a really good chance to try the product before you buy without having to leave the comfort of your house or wherever you are, that you have kind of your phone or camera with you to be able to kind of see that personalized element. And a lot of times, with fashion, that kind of sense of understanding how it will look on you becomes critically important before making that purchase. So we're trying to help people discover, consider, and eventually make that confident purchase that could reduce returns and increase user happiness over time.
Excellent. Yeah, and it's interesting. Like Snapchat, I feel like is one of the leaders in this space, and it started more with filters, right, which was kind of more playful and fun. And then
Yep.
I feel like it's worked its way into this kind of advertisement space and product placement, and now people can see real products, and in addition to all the fun ones that are still out there. But from like a product standpoint, there may be some different challenges that we've run into, as an industry, right? It's one
Right.
thing if
Yeah.
you're making like a fun filter and it doesn't have any basis in reality, it almost doesn't matter, right, how it looks. But when you're dealing with product, right, there's probably a lot more consideration that you'd have for realism, scale, attachment, like where it fits. What were some of the biggest challenges that you found, brands faced when getting their products digitized for virtual try-on experience?
Yeah, one thing I really liked about Snapchat is that AR was kind of a core part of their brand identity, right? Like people come
Yeah,
on
it's
to
not an
Snap.
add-on.
It's
Yeah.
not an add-on, exactly. It's not like we have to detour users, out of their kind of typical purchase flow or journey and have them, try to use this AR experience. People are coming in the very first tab that you enter is the camera tab, and you can just, immediately swipe over and you start playing with our lenses or filters, as a lot of people call them. So I really like that aspect. When we were at Amazon previously, I was trying to figure out what's the right way to introduce 3D experiences in some of these, and a lot of times it would help, but how do you get the right user so it doesn't provide more friction? So anybody that's starting out or interested in try on, always think of what's the user kind of flow and what's the mindset. On Snapchat it's quite a bit different, right? Because people are playing with a lot of fun lenses. It might morph your face into a character. We have these like crying lenses, all these viral lenses. So what tends to work really well from a brand standpoint on Snapchat would be stuff that's kind of more native or organic to what you're seeing in our carousel. So that could be something like beauty. A lot of times the live apparel, works really well. We have this offering that's like a live apparel try on, but even something like shoes. So I think it's like targeted demographic as well as kind of the use case and the, I'll call it, the jobs to be done that they're coming for is quite a bit different on a platform like Snapchat versus on somebody's own website versus some of these other social media or advertisement opportunities. So that's the key thing. Number one is just to try to understand who's your customer, what are they doing on these surfaces, and you, a lot of times we might have brands make their ads a little more fun or their lens experiences more fun because that's kind of what the Snapchatters is expecting, right? Is kind of a more
Yeah.
engaging, fun experience. Some of the challenges that you talked about specifically with like Snap would be um, if one time we did like a back to school campaign, and it's a lot harder to have somebody maybe like try to end table in their own space when they've been playing with all these kind of fun lenses. So it's a
Mhm.
little bit of that um product fit for the user kind of journey and experience is critically important. So it's not just if you throw out 3D or if you throw out these AR experiences, they're always guaranteed to work. It's what's the right customer and then what's the right points in their journey. So just one last point, we tend to call ours a lot more upper mid funnel, so more that discovery consideration
Mhm. Yeah.
versus immediate purchase. So a lot of our priorities is around like the speed of loading and some of this, because if it takes too long to load, they'll just go to the next lens or filter. And then the
Yeah.
quality and the realism is important, but making sure you kind of balance some of these 3D aspects of the files, or those with the needs of the user. So we can dive in any one of these, but I just think it's really interesting how different that is versus maybe these brands putting it natively on their own site. They've got different challenges and different opportunities with AR for those type of experiences.
Yeah, makes sense. And then, of course, at the center of this is the 3D model, right? So that 3D model could be used in different parts of the journey. So maybe it's, on Amazon, for example, it's one of the pieces of information on the product page, and you're kind of maybe zooming in and looking at it, trying it on.
Yep.
But that's, what you're saying is different from the social experience. And maybe even on the social experience, you're not even necessarily purchasing it, but you're sharing it and showing video of yourself with that product. So I imagine
Yeah.
that's interesting to the brand, even if it's not an immediate sale versus
Yep.
if it's, maybe on Amazon, it's a little bit more tied directly to the customer clicked on this try on and then they put in their card and
Yep.
then they bought it. In your case, it's more, what's the overall sentiment perhaps for the brand? And I
Yep.
think brands probably need a full comprehensive strategy when they're thinking about, they're utilizing that 3D content because we can create it once and then use it in all these different places. And then you
Yep.
build a
Exactly.
whole cohesive story.
Yeah, a lot of points, there that we probably can touch on. First off, like we still do attribute back, right? So it depends on what the brand's objectives are. Some might just be doing it for brand and kind of awareness and discovery of
Mhm.
a new product or a new product launch. Some are more kind of lower funnel, and they'll say, I want it to be based on X number of days after a click, or a view through. Sometimes they'll do to do that attribution. I think it's kind of critically important what you said, which is the 3D model or the AR asset kind of unlocks a lot of value if you build it in the correct way. You can reuse that both on your site and on a site like Snapchat, right? So this AR asset or this 3D model that is being created, and this is part of what Kronos is trying to do with the interoperability with glTF. You can we at Amazon, we would create 360-degree imagery, which was super popular. So you don't even have to like
Oh
send a
yeah.
user to an AR experience. You can just spin the product. I think it was like, a number of images that you would just kind of spin that was created by 3D. You can also create virtual photography with 3D. So the 3D, think of it more as like an asset that you can continuously leverage, both on your site and outside of your site. And then
Mhm.
it's just important to make sure that you're building to, we'll call it this, the standards or the specs that will be most interoperable, in the industry. And again, another plug of go to the Chronos site. You can see what some of those look like,
Mhm.
especially
Yeah.
for the TLTF, to see like what we're talking about of best practices. What I'm saying is, if you build a model that's too high, mesh quality and stuff, it might not be usable on something like Snap. We were talking about the latency and the performance. So finding that right model gets you started. And the second point I wanted to make is it takes a good amount of, we'll call it conviction and knowledge to get started internally if a new brand is thinking about going into 3D. What I'd say is you don't have to do this yourself, right? We can give a plug to
Right. Yeah.
the
That's why
company
we're
that
here.
you're at with Super DNA, but also just getting started with advertising, like somewhere like on Snap. Like we can help navigate that through. It at least gets you a way to see how consumers are interacting with your product, what a 3D model would look like. I think there's a lot of confusion of it looks cartoony, and really what you find out is the different channels is using the same model, and they might have different capabilities. So like a ray traced environment is going to look like a photograph versus
Yeah.
like some of these other AR experiences, depending on how you build the model, have different levels of fidelity. So what I'd say is this is a great way to start for any brand who is just thinking about going in and they're unsure. Don't have to build a whole team and hire all these experts and come in to kind of prove out the value. I think you can do that through some other ways, or work with a partner such as like Super DNA and yourself that's an expert already, and they can kind of get you going on your couple first models.
Yeah, totally. No, that's awesome. Yeah, and two of your points I'd like to just kind of echo on the Chrono side. One is a call to action. We're going to be refreshing our guidelines this year. We originally launched those, I think, in 2021, and things change, technology changes. But I think more importantly, our approach is going to change a little bit here. And to Patrick's point, where the consideration of the use case is important, it's kind of hard to have a one size fits all, specification and requirement where
Yes.
you're saying like the file size needs to be X and the texture resolution needs to be this and that. We're kind of trying to take a different approach where use case dependent, we can provide more custom tailored specifications. And then ideally, these similar experiences kind of stack together. Maybe a real time virtual try on experience is, quick loading and to a certain spec. And then that kind of like virtual photography rendered, ray trace thing where you've got time and resources. You can go higher with your different, polygon counts and texture resolution. So we're trying to, I think as we refresh these guidelines this year, be a little bit more, aware that there's different use cases, and we don't want to just say like this is the one thing. But if you work with a partner that can author the content at that highest quality and then offer through
Yes.
usually automation ways to reduce or downsample that 3D asset, then you get the best of both worlds because you can QA it one time, you can build it one time, and then you can use it and plug it into all these different places.
Yeah, and I
Uh,
think that's critical for, newer audiences to recognize. You don't have to go build 3 or 4. It's not like 3 or 4 times the cost that it's gonna be. You can build a
mm,
model kind of in the right resolution, in the right environment, and then almost export and have some of these, compression and other stuff to get it into the format that we would need, for other environments. So again, there's a little bit of nuance here. We don't expect brands to be experts here, but you have a community of people who have spent years, some people in most of their careers in this field that are, there to help, right? And there's resources
Mhm.
around. So just take a first step to be interested and just find out who's the right, partner or area to kind of take that first step. And just know that even if you don't do everything perfectly off the bat, there are some best practices that can get set up that, minimize costs, maximize your kind of performance and output in terms of expectations for the 3D and the customer experience.
Awesome. And yeah, the other kind of second point that I think you mentioned that touched on that I wanted to continue to dig into was this kind of sense of visual fidelity and consistency. Because I think right now we're still maybe a little bit in the Wild West where you can make a model to a specific like viewer or use case, and then you go and plug it into a different use case, and it maybe doesn't look as realistic. Maybe it's that kind of like cartoonish divide. If people have seen renders of imagery, they often don't even know it's a 3D model because it looks that good. And then, if you're running on a mobile device, there's certain compromises that happen. So I think, it's another initiative as an industry we're working on is to try to get it more that the model looks the same across different places. And I'd say another, analogy from the early days of the web is developers used to have to write different, literal like CSS or scripts, like for different web browsers, right? It's like if it's on Internet Explorer versus like Netscape or Firefox, it's like we have to write different code because each of these engines or use cases are kind of doing something a little bit unique. I think like that's something we're still working towards, right? There's probably if you get the lighting right in a different viewer, it's probably going to make 90% of the difference that it'll look consistent. I think usually that difference comes from lighting, but as an industry, we're still working towards that. Did you have some thoughts on that, Patrick?
The color is probably the biggest concern people have, right? There's the shape and the mesh. I think you're pretty good at getting the shape and the mesh correct, right? There's tricks you can do too to kind
Yeah.
of do with like these bump maps and stuff, but that doesn't tend to be the feedback that most people give. Then there's like texture and the material, right? And we've gotten pretty good at like PBR, which means physically based rendering, and like a lot of stuff to define metallic and a lot of these textures. So the textures look like if it's a shoe, if it's plastic on the glasses, even like a lens, like we got a lot of that technology figured out. The color seems to be the one that most gets the most feedback and is the most challenging. I've actually learned a tremendous amount from Emmett at Google. It'd be great to
Yeah.
have,
I'm
him on your
hoping to get him on
podcast
the podcast. Yeah.
just
He's
for,
moving
I mean,
to,
we can have a whole podcast just on this topic, right? But the
absolutely.
the short answer for this would be, I think the lighting is critically important, right? Like if you have different kind of intensity of light, amount of light, the hue of the light, it's going to make the object look different. And why does that matter? A 3D artist can kind of tune these knobs to make it look like an image in that lighting or rendered environment, right? But as soon as you take that out and you put it into kind of a neutral environment or a different render, if you've done too much of that kind of manipulation through lighting to make the color match, it's going to look completely different. The other
Yeah.
challenge we tend to have is if you don't have the physical item and you don't have a way to capture, we'll call it the exact color in the like lighting environments when the photo was captured, that's the source image. You kind of have a little bit of that bias on the color for what you're using to create the model, right? So think of this
Makes
on
sense.
if we take a vendor's image and let's say we're creating it for them, they might have taken that photo in certain lighting conditions. Maybe it was really dark, kind of, mood lighting at the evening or something to give it very dramatic. Sometimes they'll do it more in a still environment, but the lighting effects there change what color of red or burnt orange, that you would have. So um, those who own the products probably know a little bit better of the specific color or properties that they would have, so it gives them a leg up. But that's critically important for the 3D artist to be able to. You can have a sample, like a swatch or like a specific color that they should be making this to.
Mhm.
a little tricky because, let's say you're a website developer and you wanna make something black or white, you can, use your hex codes or your colors and just make it like 00, like, you can make it pure black and pure white, but if you do that in a 3D model and make it pure white, it's gonna almost, like, emit, light out. We've done this a couple of times where they made it,
Mhm.
like, pure white, and when you put a light on it, it almost reflects 100% of the light back, right?
Yeah, 'cause
So
you can't add any more than 100%, right? So, like, yeah, we
yeah.
do recommend typically people clamp their blacks and their whites, so there's that little extra
A
edge
buffer so
to
it's not
to
pure, right?
show the shininess from the sun or whatever lighting is coming in. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, making sure you don't make your models too large in terms of file size and some of that's, the first mistake or, area that to do, and then the color, getting the accuracy, for brands, I think it's a little easier because they know the source of truth or what this would look like. Beauty is a great example, we went down this rabbit hole of making sure that the product looked kind of the same on different skin tones and different things, so there is a lot about color. What I would say is the better you can start with like clean, neutral environments to capture your source imagery, the better your 3D model will look in all these renderers. So it's not so much the renderers are changing. There's a little bit of that, but I would say it's, any kind of manipulation that you have on your source model, your source 3D model to make it look a certain way, just almost expect that to not always get carried forward or be available in all these other renderers the exact same. So that's one thing that, when you're starting, just know that color is, you can get it pretty close and exact, but there's going to be a little bit of changes in nuance. And it just depends how important it is for, that Tiffany blue type of to be exact, type of thing. Just see how you can make that, um, environments, and I think Kronos has a tool where you can see how it'll look in other viewers, right? The model
Yeah.
viewer tool, so that's a
Yep.
good tool to kinda go in and check
Exactly.
your 3D model.
Cool. Yeah, I think, on that side too, I think we often get the question of is a 3D scan or photogrammetry required to make a 3D model, right? And it's just, I guess, to answer my own question, for the benefit of the audience, is I'd say it's not always required. It's one of these things that it's nice to have if you've got the, bandwidth, the logistics, the capability to get a, real high quality photogrammetry based 3D scan. It aids with a lot of what you're talking about there, Patrick, with the color accuracy and the proportions and the details. However, if you've got pretty good photography to start with, then that additional requirement of doing a 3D scan is not always necessary, right? It is amazing what artists can do these days with good reference imagery, to recreate that product without having a physical sample, because that physical sample step is often a barrier to entry when you think of all the
Yep,
logistics involved in getting it somewhere, and dealing with the use of the inventory, the return of the inventory, the condition, now I have to resell it used, whatever, right? Especially in the furniture space, we ran into that challenge a lot,
yep,
at Wayfair, and
yep.
we ended up modeling almost all of our stuff. I call it by hand, where artists are basically looking at references and drawing the thing.
Yeah, no, I think it's important. I mean, there's a photogrammetry, there's more of kind of an artist led, which is, starting from kind of scratch or using a reference model that's close. And then there's a new one called Gaussian splatting too. So what I
Yeah.
just recommend is when you're getting into the space, again, it's like, purpose based, like understanding what are most important attributes or what's, key, because like you said, if you're trying to do photogrammetry, you might have to send the model, but you get other benefits in terms of the color accuracy. So just work with, the 3D creator, and hopefully they have more than just one method that they're using, right? Not everybody does, but I think just weighing the pros and cons is, important to get the right kind of model that you want. At the end of the day, they're all going to look pretty good and they have their own benefits. But it's just, yeah, worth noting the different ways of creation because you might have some different, trade-offs involved based on each of those.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see we are coming up on time. I feel like we could talk about this topic,
Yeah,
at
I was
least
gonna say
twice,
this
well,
is
probably all day.
fantastic.
I did want to just give you a quick shout out for the work that you did within Kronos on, keeping the orientation of different products consistent, right? So there was a collaboration between like Amazon and Snap, for example, and I believe it
Yep,
was eyewear, where you could
yep,
identify like, the bridge of the nose is where we're going to attach this thing. that's
Yep.
another kind of key, component that, again, if you want to spend like maybe 1 minute on that, like what you lessons learned and where that
Yeah.
is headed for the future, I think that was an awesome topic that you helped lead.
Yeah, I mean, when you started at the beginning of the podcast, you talked a little bit about kind of room environments. So that's where I started too, was like furniture and home. And how to place items is pretty easy, right? It's either on the bottom, or if something on the wall you might put in the back center, or the ceiling you might put on the top center. But the anchor points, if you will, of where something got placed in the room was fairly standard, fairly easy. And then there was some stacking and stuff, like if you we would swap products in and out sometimes. How do you deal with that? But that was a completely different kind of challenge. The biggest part there was the consistency on the size, the consistency on the color, like all that stuff we talked about.
Yeah.
We've kind of come a long way on getting most of that defined. And then when I moved to Snap, we were working with Amazon because of new relationship there, and we wanted to bring in their catalog of eyewear, their glasses, sunglasses. And what we found was the models were almost being built the same way, where the anchor point or the pivot point was on the bottom center, or could be in the center.
Kind of in a
But
random place.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
your glasses height could be different, right? So when you're actually trying to fit it onto your face, we had some that were kind of look too low, like
Like
too
up on
high,
your
like it
forehead.
was.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't consistently. And what we were doing is trying to like move the almost like a bias to like move it up or down to for individual brands. And what it was is that this is kind of what these 3D standard groups are for. There was no standardization, right? So we were manually trying to manipulate stuff. It still didn't look great. So this was ripe for, hey, is there a way that we can standardize this where I can receive a model from everybody, kind of know the properties or know certain aspects about it, and it'll fit the best on a human every single time. So you touched on like where the glasses would really matter is kind of that bridge of the nose, right? Even if you move your face, like if you're trying it on, this is almost the like anchor point where it'll be. And then, there could be, we had problems with the arms of the glasses and which kind of angle it was going. So what we ended up doing is we put kind of definition points. This is the anchor pivot right here on the bridge. And then there's these key points or additional points that you'd want to define. And if your model has those points, I can take it in, don't have to, like, as long as I know it has these, attributes defined, I can set it up perfectly on every human, every time type of thing. So we did
Yeah.
that for
It's huge.
glasses. Shoes is the other one, kind of putting the anchor point on the back of the heel so that the shoe can kind of always fit. The opening of the hole would, sometimes clip your occluder, or the leg that was being occluded. So we've got that for, I think there was eyewear, footwear. We started going into the watches and rings and jewelry. So I'm still trying to get that so that it's pushed through. Maybe I can get somebody to like do all the GitHub work on there, because that's kind of been the blocker recently. But yeah, there is a need in the industry. Like everybody probably has a similar pain point when they're trying to send their products out. And the more we
Mhm.
can standardize so that we're all speaking kind of the same language or the pivot points here, that'll just allow us to focus on the 3D quality and the customer experience more than trying to get the 3D models interoperable with different systems.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, appreciate your work there, and thank you for coming on the show. We loved having you here today, and yeah, thanks. I think we'll wrap it up unless you have any other last closing thoughts.
No, it's been fun, and like I said, I'm really looking forward to seeing a lot of the topics you have. I've learned a lot from you, and I hope people subscribe and listen to your podcast, because this is a great resource. So thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thanks. No, my pleasure. I have a lot of folks like yourself that I have these conversations with, and we thought, hey, we should put this out there for more folks to kind of be able to contribute to the conversation. So look forward to continuing this throughout 2025.
Thank you.
All right, bye. Thanks.